Just say a few words on behalf of the Caribbean Management Unit of the World Bank. The unit just wanted to express the appreciation to the Prime Minister's carried to the government of the Commonwealth of Dominica in taking a leadership in organizing this conference and in inviting us to present the rapid damage impact assessment that we prepared together with other development partners and with the government of Dominica. We have been following the consequences of Tropical Storm Erika very closely from very beginning, and I would just like to take a moment to reiterate our condolences to the families that lost their loved ones. I would also like to reiterate the message of very strong support that the World Bank has to the government and to the people of the Commonwealth of Dominica in these difficult times. This is not the first time that Dominica has been suffering this kind of damages. We have an example in 2011 when heavy rains caused lots of landslides, lots of flooding, impacted livelihoods, destroyed infrastructure, affected delivery of social services, especially to the poorest ones. The climate change is not going to make these events less frequent. So it is nice to see that the government of Dominica is well aware of that and has already taken quite a few number of initiatives to respond to such threats. And the World Bank stands very ready to support those efforts. Currently, we are supporting them under the existing project, this Disaster Vulnerability Reduction Project of 38 million, that we are working with the government at the moment on better adjusting this project to address the country's current needs. We are confident that the meeting today will help increase awareness about very difficult circumstances that Dominica is at as of today, and we would really like to make a plea to all the donors around the table to do whatever possible in maximizing the support and complementing the activities as much as possible. Thank you again for the opportunity to say a few words and to reiterate our message of very strong support. And I would now like to invite my colleague, Yohannes Kesete, who is one of the authors of Rapid Damage and Impact Assessment, to present the assessment to you. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for having us this morning. I was part of the team that came in September to Dominica to do the rapid impact and damage assessment. It was my first time to Dominica, and I was able to see right after a week of being here what the damage and what the effect of Tropical Storm Erika has been. So to give you a bit of background about Tropical Storm Erika, it arrived on August 27th, bringing with it heavy rainfall that lasted for about 9 hours. The rainfall was characterized by high intensity, and owing to the mountainous topography of Dominica, this resulted in rapid floods with little warning. In addition, combination of the intense rainfall and the landslide and the dry season, number of landslides and slope failures occurred throughout the country that resulted in major damage. So following the event, the government acted swiftly in 2 days, 9 areas were named as special disaster areas: Petit Savan, Pitchland, Good Hope, Bath Estate, Dubic, Campbell, Colibistry, Saint-Sauveur, and Petit Soufrier. And the initial assessment was about 7,200 people were affected. The government established an account on the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank to receive recovery construction contributions. The National Emergency Planning Organization was activated to keep the nation informed on safety protocols and procedures. The government also requested the World Bank and other development partners to do a rapid impact and damage assessment, and funding was mobilized from the European Union to support this effort through the ACP-EU Natural Disaster Risk Reduction Program. So the rapid assessment started just a week after the event, with an objective of quantifying the damage so that the government could use it as a basis to design and build a comprehensive reconstruction and financing strategy. And the main objectives are: one, to bring together all the available data and information across sectors using a common methodology to analyze this data and come up with a sector-by-sector damage and impact numbers, and also to determine the macroeconomic implication of this event. In addition, the assessment outlined recommendations for each sector and an overall framework or guiding principle for recovery and reconstruction. The assessment team was a large team comprising of many development partners. It was led by the government, but as you can see in the slide, CDIMA, CDB, UNDP, UN Women, UN-ECLAC, UNICEF, PAHO, FAO, WFP, the Red Cross, OACS Commission, UE, and the World Bank participated in this effort. So it was a joint effort that involved many stakeholders and development partners. And for each of the sectors, focal points from each of the ministries were identified, and all the assessment was done in collaboration with the government. So before I go into the details of the damage and the impact, it's good to recognize the constraints of the rapid assessment. This was done in a period of about 3 weeks, starting from September 7th. It ended 23rd, and the results were presented to the government on the 25th. So data is continuously being gathered by the government, and as we speak, I'm sure new data is also coming up. So the rapid assessment gives a snapshot of what happened based on the data that was available at the time. And also another limitation is that the assessment focuses on sectors, on few selected sectors that are relevant for the country. So there are areas that might be overlooked as well. What the rapid impact and assessment does not provide is a detailed project level or individual level assessment of damage. It gives an overview at a sector level, at a high level. So all of the sectors that we looked at, they were organized into 3 categories: as a productive sector, infrastructure sector, and social sector. Under the productive sector, we have the agriculture, tourism, and industry and commerce. And as you can see, the total damage and loss to these sectors is about $88 million, which is about 240 EC. And this represents approximately around 16% of the GDP, which is quite significant. Damage to the agriculture sector are mostly to crops, the ram factories, the bay oil distillery, farm roads, tree covers, park facilities, and the fishing craft. In the tourism sector, about 31 of hotels were affected one way or another. 11 ceased operating, 9 dive businesses and 7 tour agencies were also affected. In the industry and commerce, 34.5% of the businesses with a combined employment of over 1,000 employees were directly impacted. 25 businesses reported damage to their premises, and 25% and 16% reported stock damage. So the damage to the sectors were quite significant. The second category, the infrastructure sector, which suffered the most damage, includes the water and sanitation, air and seaports, roads and bridges, electricity and telecom. And as you can see from the table, most of the loss comes from the roads and bridges, which were affected, as you also saw in the pictures. A lot of bridges and a lot of road sections were damaged because of this flash flood. So the total loss of about 330 million US dollars, which is approximately 62% of the GDP, which is quite significant. Damage to the water and sanitation sector are mostly damage to intakes and transmission lines and sewer lines. And because of damage to sewer lines, there was also problems of water contamination and vector propagation. Airports, both airports were affected, but the Douglas Charles International Airport was significantly affected because of flooding and mud deposits. Roads and bridges, about 17% of roads and 6% of bridges were fully damaged. 24% of roads and 44% of bridges were partially damaged, and approximately 60% of the road in the country was inaccessible right after the storm. Ministry of Public Works and other agencies were able to clear up these and open most of the roads in quite short amount of time, period of time, including the airport. My first mission, early September, we had to charter a flight, but by the time we were about to leave in September, the airport was open. So, even though the damage was significant in a period of 3 weeks, they were able to clean it. Electricity outages were experienced across the island. Intakes and pipes in the hydropower generating system, transmission distribution grids were damaged. Telecommunication, the damage were primarily incurred due to breaks in fiber optic cable lines that resulted in interruption of services outside of Roseau. The third sector is the social sector, which comprises housing, education, and health. The total damage are about 60 million US dollars, which is equivalent to 160 EC. Approximately 480 houses were damaged or destroyed, and mostly in Petite Savanne and the rest of the country as well. Education, 23 schools were impacted out of a total of 75. 13 experienced structural damage and 2 are fully destroyed. About 3,500 primary and secondary school students were affected by this damage. Health, 9 of the primary healthcare facilities were impacted by flooding, and as a result, they were not operational for the first couple of days. And of course, there are so many people that were injured, that were injured because of the event as well. So overall, about 69% of the damage was to infrastructure, 18% to the productive sector, and 13% to the social sector. And if you look at the damage by each sector, you can see most of the damage comes from damage to roads and bridges, followed by the housing sector at 11% and agriculture at about 10%. So those 3 sectors were the mostly affected. We had an economist that worked based on these numbers, what the macroeconomic implications of this disaster would be for Dominica. As you can see, the numbers are significant, about 90% of GDP, about $480 million. Just to put that into perspective, the loss, damaged and losses, they were equivalent to 270% of 2014 export figures, 195% of the imports, and 615% of the gross fixed capital formation of the country. It is expected that reconstruction in the coming couple of years, will make up for some of the economic activity, the lost economic activity, but in the long run, Dominica will need significant support to rebuild. If all public assets were financed by debt, this would double Dominica's current public debt. So access to grant financing and a modest amount of highly concessional debt is important to maintain macroeconomic stability over the next few years. So I'll conclude by just mentioning a few points on recovery and reconstruction framework. This was part of the rapid damage and impact assessment as well. So going forward, since these events would probably be more frequent, the emphasis on building back better to ensure that all reconstruction is resilient, the focus on the poorest and most vulnerable groups, as these events tend to affect disproportionately the poor, and use of hazard data and risk assessment to inform investment decisions so that the money is spent well. And finally, it would require coordinated effort of all stakeholders, the donors and government, to make sure that the recovery and reconstruction is successful. Thank you.